Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to continue with our exploration of Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics. This is step 6 that we're exploring now. So, the beginning of this step, we're looking at the mental training, the training of the spirit as per usual. Now, he starts the introduction of this step with another warning, essentially, to really get together everything up to this point before continuing on. Now, probably the most important part of that warning is the message of equilibrium, so that you can continue on with a healthy equilibrium. And there is certainly value to really working through your black and white mirror, not just from the perspective of the emotions and habits, that kind of stuff from that sense, but also from the physicality and from the mental component as well. So you begin to find health and equilibrium, positive disposition, all of these expressions that allow for a healthy path forward, especially as you start unifying with more potent substrates of energy and with grander intelligence. We want to make sure that we have these things sorted out, because the habits of the mental body, the habits of the astral body, and the habits of the physical body, the degree of cultivation in each of these is what the higher frequencies will express through. And it will also determine the quality of what you're capable of touching as you keep with your ascendant practice. So if you have very poor quality physical, emotional, and mental functioning and health, it's very difficult for high quality spiritual intelligence and energy to move through you, because there's nothing that it resonates with. Okay, so this is all about resonance and correspondence. So we need those to be functioning for this to really carry itself out fully and healthily. That said, if we obsess over perfection, we will make no progress whatsoever, because we won't actually progress. We'll obsess over everything that we're doing, and this will create attachment, which will, literally by definition, inhibit growth. So, moving on to the actual exercises here, we start with an exploration of qualities of mind, and Bardon uses the word spirit here. Now, these are very similar to the 4 bases of supernatural power from a Buddhistic perspective. These are will to the fire element, discernment essentially to the air element, logic, reason, etc., feeling to the water element, and consciousness to the earth element. So these are, just like we looked at the feelings of the elements in, I can't remember which step it was, but we looked at the energy of each element, and you start exploring and experimenting with perceiving your reactions and the relationships in normal life as well, with the ebb and flow and flux of the different elements, what gives rise to which element from an astral standpoint. We're now looking at the elements from a quality of mind standpoint. So will has many different facets to it, and discernment, logic, reason, the air element facets of the mental experience there's a lot there. Same with feeling qualities, often associated back to the astral experience, but there's a reticulation that occurs. And of course, the consciousness aspect that is an amalgamation of electric and magnetic and the movement in between, which is the air. So that gives us the consciousness aspect, the earth, which recycles back into essentially the light of the spirit, or the fire element, once again at a higher octave. So we keep exploring this, and we really need to put time into discerning the difference. So the meditation, the first one here, is to really look at perception. Can you actually perceive what the quality of will in the mind is? What is that? Because there's so much subtle stuff that's occurring. We want to tune into it. Why is it so important to be able to differentiate the will? Differentiate that from discernment, differentiate that from feeling qualities, and differentiate that from the consciousness. Well, if we can perceive something with specificity, we can have some agency over it, which means we have freedom. Now we can look at this from the perspective of control, which would be, okay, if you can tap that part of the mind, of the spirit that is in charge of will, you can now control deficits in will, or perhaps where there's too much will, you can start to have control. Now you flip that, and we sort of take the hard-nosed, egoistic approach to the training out, and you get freedom. And that is sort of as this keeps octaving up, you get freedom. And that's one thing that we really want to work here. If we have specificity of perception, this allows for agency and freedom within that particular element and that particular quality of mind. And then once we have freedom there, then that gives us the agency to start playing with it. So with discernment, what is it that we are able to perceive? What is this movement of logic and reason? If we are too attached to particular movements of mind, then we won't be able to discern freely, which means we will be that much further from the truth, right? Which is a whole other topic of conversation in and of itself. So if we have an absence of the will quality, then the particular avenue of discernment will also be wavy, right? We won't be able to continue. Now, as all of these things come together, we get the consciousness aspect, where you have will, you have discernment, and you have feeling or attachment, cohesion. These all work together in an amalgamation, which leads to a stability of perspective and a stability of the qualities of the mental body, the qualities of the mind. When these are all in harmony and you have equilibrium, then we have a healthy give and take of perspective and information, where there is not egoistic attachment to the perception and the perspective. But we can also hold it, we can explore it, we can have the will penetrate it, and we can see many different facets and angles of whatever it is that we're working with. So this is of absolute imperative importance to progression on the path in a healthy way, in an expedited way, and in a free way. Now, as with all exercises, there's always a near enemy, and for this, the near enemy of freedom is control. And this takes some very, we could say, like clean work of the mind to really parse these apart so that we can move forward in a way that's positive for ourselves and for everyone and thing that we encounter. So very, very important, that first step. that first portion, that first exercise here, that we really get that together. When you're looking at the positivity of the future chains of events, and sort of the connective web, the karmic ripple effect, you'll really start to understand why this might be of such great value. Now, the next exercise for this particular step is to do with perception once again. Now that you've sort of tuned into these qualities of mind, these qualities of these are sort of like the lower aspect of the spirit, but there's a nice bridge effect. Once you tune into these, it'll give you an indication towards this more refined substance, a mental quality. And now we start to look at, can we perceive the difference and integrate the spirit, the mental body, the astral, okay, and the physical. And so this is done initially through just static, sit in your asana, in your meditation posture, and can you perceive the more smooth, we could say, that's more subtle vibration of the qualities of mind as they reverberate through the qualities that you've cultivated of the soul, of the astral body, and that as it permeates and moves through the physical. And this brings us back again to mind moves Qi, Qi moves body, if you want to look at this from a Tai Chi perspective. So you start in the integration mode, the unification, from a static position, okay? And you look at, okay, if this can't resonate, if you can't find the alignment, what's not allowing the qualities of the spirit to permeate through the astral qualities that you've developed? What are the physical aberrations and blockages? And this helps you start to clean things out so that you can actually have alignment and resonance between mind, body, and soul. Okay? And this alignment is key. Why is this alignment key? Because you are essentially allowing for creating, a magnification device for power within yourself through unification. So there's a lot of prerequisites and we could say like peripheral work that needs to be done to have this unification work, because any and every element of contrast that we have with ourselves at each layer will present, I always perceive it as like a fish hook that's in, and it's attached to an elastic band that's pulling things all apart. And as you start to integrate, it's like those, there's scissors that are cutting those elastics, and boom, that part slams in, bang, that part slams in, and you find alignment and integration, unification. Now, what you unify with is something to be discussed later on. So that's the first part. Then you take this into moving, right? Going for a walk, moving through the spirit. In this case, again, mind leads Qi, Qi leads body, and so you are functioning from the mental layer, and the astral is going along for the ride in unification. Important detail. And the physical is going with that. He describes this as like a glove within a glove within a glove type of feeling. So you need to be able to perceive the difference between the coarse physical, the slightly less coarse astral, and then as that smooths out into the mental. And for the way I look at things, this isn't really working with the spirit, though the spirit is there. I look at the spirit as coming much more refined still than the typical mental substance we might work with. But everything is always refining, right? So we want to keep that in mind. There's always refinement. So if we impose a static understanding, an estatic disposition to what we're working on, and we go, okay, this is this, then I've achieved this, then we are very unlikely to grow past that. So we want to maintain an open mind all the time with this stuff, especially when it comes to our perceptions. So, mind moves chi, chi moves body. Can you go for a walk where the spirit leads at whatever gradation or level of refinement you might be working with? Now, where this, I think many people fall short, and where a lot of our current, spiritual work that is out there falls short, is in this embodiment trend, this trend of embodiment. It's all back to the body, mindfulness of the body, focus on your breathing, your body, your blood flow, your organs, blah, 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 blah. Is there value? Yes, of course. However, if you obsess over saturating the mind into the body, we can create a massive blockage to the free-flowing, integrated function of the spirit as it expresses through the mind, the soul, and the body. That is the unification. If we obsess over the minutiae of the body, the mind will create all these blockages, right? And I remember going to a massage therapist once who was quite sensitive, and this is the type of meditation I was doing a lot of, this mind within the body, embodiment, mind in the body, perceiving the body, minutiae of the body, subtlety of the body. And I'm sure my Australian friends are laughing at how many times I just said body. They always make fun of how I say the body. Anyway, this masseuse, she said, she was trying to work out some kink, and she goes, listen, there's not enough room for both of us in there, because the weight of the mind carries with it physiological effect. So if we are integrated, smooth, the flick of the mind moves the energy, it moves freely through the body moves. And if you look at this from a perspective of, say, like elite sports and stuff, right? If you were trying to, whatever the sport is, whether it is fighting or, basketball or anything else, if you are obsessing over the minutiae of subtle body motion, there's so much stuff that you'd have less space for, so much data that isn't playing through. So when you are in the flow, right, it's a very different experience to being hyper obsessed with the subtleties of the body. Okay, and this is something that we really want to sort out, and it is one of the roads that many will go down, especially if you have issues with pain, that type of thing, is will fall into this embodiment thing, will hyper obsess over the body, over injury, psychological, emotional, and physical, and the actual integration, the freedom, this is the key, the freedom, the agency which allows for freedom, and through that freedom, integrated, unified expression will be massively hindered. Okay, will get in the way of it. So he mentions this here, that when you're walking and the spirit's leading the walk, you're not obsessing over the movement of the body. Now you can always tune in, course correct, release this, release that, and then zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, right? There's certainly value in that. But with the embodiment trend, while there can be types of healing that occur, there is also a drastic reduction that we impose on spiritual growth, in terms of the growth of our union with more refined layers of spirit. How can you unify with something more refined when you're obsessing over what is more dense? That's very tricky, unless you obsess over the dense thing until the point where that density breaks in terms of the mind's relationship with it, and then you're touching the light substance, the emptiness beneath it. That's always another method, but very few people actually break through the body, break through the coarse, dense layers in that way. It's one way to go, but it's very tricky to actually make that transition. So that is this movement towards mind moves chi, chi moves body, and this integration. So every time you do have to zoom in, right, and clear something out, okay, that's something to take note of. What are the elements of the mind and mental perception, those qualities of the mind, of the spirit that he mentions here, that might be out of balance, right? We need equilibrium of mind. What are the qualities of the astral body that are out of balance? Again, working through the elements. We want equilibrium, or at least the potential to work from a space of equilibrium, from a standpoint of health and accelerated growth and function from a spiritual standpoint, and of course with the body as well. So there's still more exercises in this particular step, and I just want to make sure I touch on them here. But equilibrium is the key thing, and so this is where we go back to the intro of this step, where he mentions that you want equilibrium before moving on, because you can definitely do some damage. You can hold yourself back. Okay. Okay. So this brings us into, of course, alignment when it comes to what he would describe as further magical action, when it comes to ritual, when it comes to potency on your path, potency in what you are doing. Now, often we look at this from the outside. There's people who tune into this and this alignment, and they'll have charisma. We go, charisma. So there's alignment, at least in that moment, between mind, feeling, and body, right? And of course, athletes have this alignment, hence why we brought them up earlier. And by trying to get inside too much, you break that alignment. When you try to figure something out, you break the relationship, and the expression of integrated ease of effect falls away. So when we try to figure it out, when we zoom in, we can break the thing. So, in the moment, in game time, right, you're probably not zooming in. You wait until post-game and training to zoom in. So there's different types of practice that we do, even if you are, meditating as a big blanket term. There is meditations that you might look at as the game, the performance, right? And then there is the meditation that we do that might be to iron out or zoom in and iron out different, personality traits or whatever that might be getting in the way. So you play with this, right? Now, he brings up, okay, so, all right, charisma. Often charisma or that alignment is stuck within a particular paradigm, whatever that person's paradigm might be. Again, whether it is their sport, their work, the aspects that they typically speak about. And you'll see when people light up as this alignment comes into focus and into play. You'll be having a conversation with someone, you hit something, and suddenly they fall into flow when discussing a certain topic. There's that integration that occurs. And that is something to note in people. And if it's positive, you feed it. You show interest when that particular alignment pops up. And this allows for somebody to sustain their relationship with that flow and that alignment. And this is a doorway in, which is really, really valuable. Okay, now of course from a healing standpoint, he brings up healing. He calls it magnetopaths, but essentially energy type healing, where you are able to, because you can perceive it in yourself, mind, soul, energy, the astral body, the mental body, the physical body, because you have these perceptions and many facets of perception developed in yourself. You can perceive that in somebody else. And from a healing standpoint, you then have the freedom to work with that person to help move those blockages of mind, those blockages of emotion, those blockages of body, from a healing standpoint. And there's a lot of value in that too. Now, I said work with a person because there's a lot of people who do this work who are kind of attempting to prove out their own skill to themselves through affecting other people. The easiest way to do that without disturbing your own equilibrium is to do it from a place of healing. But we want to make sure we are working with people and not for their best good from our highest. And, to prove your own skill to yourself isn't really from your highest. That's from a place of great depletion that we're working from when we're trying to prove our own skill to ourselves or to practice. There's a lot of, if you look into yourself when you're doing that type of stuff, there's a there's a lot of work you do on your own mind, your own energy, your own body, that's required if that's the place that we are functioning from. If you want to develop systems of proof, it's best not to do that just sort of willy-nilly, right? There's ways that you can work on that are positive. So anyway, we can always talk more about that at some point as well. So healing is a really, really valuable way in which you can express these practices and these traits. Okay, now let's see, what else do we have here? Because he has so many exercises in this part of the book, and I just cannot remember all of them top to bottom. Mental body influences the mental sphere, the physical body. Okay, so this whole section is alignment, right? Alignment and perception. And as we refine, as we touch more refined energy, more refined states of consciousness, this permeates through, and we need to find alignment mentally, astrally, physically, and really come into harmony with that. And that is the process of alchemy, the process of transformation. Okay, so as this is occurring, who and what we are will change. We'll die off, we'll change, we'll die off, we'll change, and we keep evolving. And so if we don't have equilibrium, mentally, astrally, physically, it will make this process of death and rebirth that much more, within this incarnation, that much more painful and, and tumultuous, okay? So the next part of this step is, we're still working from the mental body. It has to do with the sensory perception, okay? I mean, you could play with if it's physical, if it's, astral and of the soul, or if it's of the mind. He has it in the schooling of the spirit. And this is tapping into your sense gates from different layers of perception. So just like you had the spirit or the mind space and quality moving through the astral, body moving through the physical. This applies through the sense gates as well. So can you see through your eyes from the perspective of the spirit, right? Can you see through the physical eyes, through the astral eyes, from the perspective of the spirit? Just like the spirit walks the astral in the body, in the physical body, can you perceive? From where are you perceiving? Same through the ears. Can you perceive the through the ears, the waves of sound from the perspective of the spirit? What happens is that moves through the astral body, through the physical, and of course through the feeling gate. And as we keep exploring this, we will start to find that the spiritual eyes can perceive things that the astral eyes, the physical eyes can't, that the spiritual ears can perceive what the astral and the physical can't. And same with the feeling gate. So you work through this and you start to wake up more and more subtle sensory perception. Okay. Now, of course, there's the expression of, well, anything that you are perceiving is not of the spirit or through emptiness. It is of duality. Because if you can perceive a thing, that means there's the absence of all the other stuff, which allows for the perception of that thing. Right? So duality and non-duality, and that is something to be explored from the meditational standpoint as well. Okay, so lots of value in this. Perceiving from the space of the physical identity, moving out, say, into the life force, the vital energy, the vital life force. What is it to perceive life force from the perspective of life force? What is it to perceive astral energy from the perspective of astral energy? What is it to perceive movements of the mind from the space of the mind? Now, what is it to perceive vital energy, life force, from the perspective of the astral? What is it to perceive life force from the perspective of the spirit and the mind? So there's lots of different explorations to look into here, right? This is not so, cut and dry, simple. This is a whole rich rainbow of experience, of all of it, okay? And so we're just pulling apart and shifting the identity around of it. This is a more refined permutation of the astral training exercise. I think it was one of the astral training exercises earlier in the book, where you're looking at, the different body parts and the elements and that kind of stuff. So identity, from where are you perceiving what? That's an interesting thing to meditate on as well. Okay, so let's move on now to the training of the soul, step 6. Continuing on here with the schooling of the soul, step 6, Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics. Now, in step 5, we looked at Akasha from the perspective of the all-penetrating quality that it has. Okay, now there was another quality we mentioned that was all-encompassing. Okay, so the exercise given in step 5 is it's pointing at this all-penetrating quality. That is why it is looking for the center of 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 whatever the thing is, including ourselves, as a means of breaking through into the Akasha by breaking through a depth point. This is the opposite. In step 6, we're looking at the all-encompassing nature of the Akasha, right? So we are expanding universally to a point where the perspective breaks and we disappear into the Akasha. So the relationship to space can break going in, and the relationship with space can break going out. And that is what is required to really start to merge with the Akasha. Now, the Akasha has an interesting relationship to equilibrium. And we want to make sure we don't forget that. In the intro to the book, and I did a whole video that was over an hour just on the intro of this book, so you can find that. The intro, Bardon makes it very clear that the Akasha is working with the elements, that all the elements come out of the Akasha and express at each plane. And of course, if the elements are if the elements are expressing within each plane, right? Say physical, vital, astral, mental, for example. There's of course the spectrum that we're actually working up the vibrational scale. So at each subdivision and subdivision of that and subdivision of that, as you keep penetrating into different layers, there's always going to be this interplay of the elements. And this comes from the Akasha. The elements come from the Akasha, which is where they exist, we could say, prior to differentiation, right? So this equilibrium is very, very important, right? And we want to make sure that we're constantly working with that and understanding it and developing it with as much richness as possible. Okay, as you start progressing with this stuff, the potential to do harm to yourself and of course to others increases. Why is this? Well, if we are working from the causal plane, which the Akasha is, there's a lot of potential risk that can occur. Now, when we are able to unify and integrate mentally, astrally, vitally, physically, then aberrations, right, negative tendencies will have the potential to express in through the physical much more readily. So if you haven't cleaned up your black and white mirror, if you haven't cleaned up your internal dialogue, your perspective of the mind, and you have a very good alignment, ill will expressed outwardly can cause effect outwardly, right? Judgment outwardly, and the types of contraction and acidity that get weirded up inside the body can create harm to you yourself. And so when we are looking at this, we start to develop a very, very clear, tangible understanding that how we view the world affects ourselves and affects the world. How we feel has a very real physiological effect on ourselves and the world. Nothing exists in a vacuum, including space. So we need to keep that in mind, and working with the Akasha is the doorway to absolutely everything else. Okay? So this is, equilibrium is very, very important for our own health. And whoa, that's what happens when you live in a van and you fall through the stairwell. Okay, so the first portion of this exercise is to get us acquainted with the Akasha, and he uses the words the astral ether, and he uses the Akasha, somewhat paralleling the ether and the Akasha. Now, in esoteric worlds, most people who use the term, the phrase, the Akasha, let's make sure that we have, all right, I don't know if that helps. Most people who use the term the ether are referring to life force, right, to vital energy. They might use etheric life force and variations thereof. Most are referring to the life force. When I use ether, I'm usually referring to a relationship with the Akasha at its more coarse nature. And when I refer to Akasha, I'm usually referring to Akasha from its more refined nature. Now, Akasha exists within a vibrational scale as well. And the more time you spend with Akasha from its emptiness perspective, the more you'll see this and the more you'll experience this. And through this sort of smoothness, this smooth emptiness, it will drastically amplify your perceptions of subtle energy throughout the entirety of the vibrational scale. Now, the more refined you start to go, especially as you start to break into high-end astral light, and from there beyond that, in the light realms, the Akasha, the refinement of the Akasha has to essentially match and become, it's more or less a prerequisite for the next evolution of alchemical refinement that you go through. So working with the Akasha can really drastically amplify your progress. Now, in the previous step, when we were looking at the workings of the soul and these explorations of the elements, he mentioned, I believe it was either step 4 or 5, where you touch the energy universally from a very refined place, the energy of that element, and then you bring it into form, say into a shape or a sphere in front of you, and the energy starts to shift from its very refined universal state into a coarser, more tangible astral state perhaps in front of you. So we want to keep this in mind. This was a bit of an allusion to, or a bit of a finger pointing towards what we're working on now. Okay, and we want to make it very clear once again that the exercises in their specificity are merely fingers pointing at the moon being the quality of the energy that we are looking to touch and the relationship that we're looking to develop with the particular substance. So the exercise might be geared towards, say, touching the all-penetrating nature of the Akasha, or cultivating a relationship with the all-encompassing nature of the Akasha. But we want to make sure we don't get stuck on the finger and forget about the moon. Okay, make sure that we continue to have a recognition of the thing that we're actually working towards, the relationship we're looking to cultivate. Okay, the technique is more or less irrelevant once it gets you there, if it gets you there. And this is where transmission can be so valuable, because I could give you an exercise that you work through, like a mental training exercise, say that all-penetrating exercise, or in this case, the all-encompassing one. And while you sort of work through that, I could be saturating you with the transmission of the Akasha substance. And then you will relate the exercise, will have a subconscious relationship to the energy, right? And this means that when you go to that exercise in the future, it will naturally pull at the energy that was embedded into it. And then over time, you don't need the exercise anymore. This is a way to incredibly just catalyze the growth process, the learning process, hugely. So now, in this exercise, Bardon introduces the ultraviolet coloring of the Akasha, and he makes it very clear that this is not the Akasha. This is a perception of the Akasha. How the Akasha reflects through the clairvoyant eye, we might say, would be through the ultraviolet coloring, but that it is in reality clear. Now, this has been my experience, is the deeper I go, the more refined I get, the more the reflections of Akasha start to subside, and you start to tune in closer and closer to the thing itself in its more, we might say, more true form. And that's something that you may experience as you keep cultivating this, okay? Now, the Akasha being so refined, so smooth, it's a little bit different than building up, say, life force or astral energy, in the sense that the pressurization, when you're building up life force, you start to pressurize the tissue. You feel that expansiveness as the energy's filling out and inflating the tissue. The same with the astral substances as well. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of value to this when it comes to your health, your energy levels, everything of form that we typically might work with. Now, remembering that the Akasha is a substance behind form, right? Behind the breaking into the elements. It has a very different relationship. And so Bardon is very clear that you are not accumulating the Akasha the same way you would accumulate vital energy. How I look at it, it's more as if we're building a relationship with Akasha. So the more we strengthen our relationship with the Akasha, the more the Akasha can flow through, and the more we can merge with it, the more completely we can merge with this causal plane itself, as well as the sort of the paradox of what it is. The more we try to pinpoint the Akasha and go, oh, it is this, that's a really, really good indication that you're not really fully resonating with the Akasha, okay? Because it is prior to form. If you are imposing absolutes onto a paradox, there's a really good chance that the mind isn't actually settling into a relationship with the paradox itself, okay? So we need to abandon the need to stabilize our identity through the known. And that is absolutely key to growing with the Akasha. Okay? So you build your relationship with the Akasha, you breathe it in, breathe it through the blood, you breathe it through the field, and you go, okay, well, if this thing is spaceless and timeless, this substance, how is it that it is working in space, right? And this is sort of one of the paradoxes. And you will, through practice, become more and more familiar with existing in this place of uncertainty. And the relationship with the Akasha can then grow. Okay? So this is really, 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 really important. The embracing of the unknown, especially with the Akasha. Okay? So that is the first portion of this exercise, introducing us to the ether, the Akasha. And he offers a couple of sort of warnings here that you need to essentially... There's a feeling as if you are removed from the world, right? And this is because the world is marked by space and marked by time. Perception is marked by space and marked by time. So as we surrender the tensions, the perspectives of time and space, there's a type of being, what we could say, removed from the world. Now, this is a perspective that is just as valid if you are entirely connected to the world. Once again, timeless and spaceless. You are at one, or atoned with, at one with everything, right? Which means that you are also, technically, you could be removed from, in terms of what side your perspective is flipping to, right? Two sides of the same coin. Again, paradox. This is the Akasha. Everything breaks down when we get to the Akasha. Paradox, paradox, paradox. Okay? Now, really, really common when you start working with the Akasha in this way, that people will start to, he describes it here as lose consciousness, and this is no understatement. The first time I experienced the Akasha through transmission, outside of my own cultivation towards that, and through transmission, I was turning gray. I was like almost passing out, falling off my chair. It was like I remember the dude next to me, including the man giving the transmission as well. They're both like, "Dude, are you okay?" And so the Akasha is pretty intense. We don't want to lose consciousness. Okay, we want to slowly edge our way into greater relationship with it. We also want to make sure, and he mentions this here, that you don't want to be falling asleep. Okay, you get accustomed to this state over time, but you don't want to be falling asleep. This state where we are normally sort of glimpsing through this would be in deep, deep sleep. So the habit of the mind or the body is, oh, that frequency, that means deep sleep. Now, many of us will try to go, I have a great idea. If I can't sleep, I'll drop into the Akasha and I'll fall asleep. Boom. Life hack. No more insomnia. Easy sleep. Don't do this, because if you do, it is very likely that you will have a very difficult time breaking this habit. And anytime you go to enter the Akasha, you will fall asleep. Why do we not want this? Because we want full consciousness, full conscious awareness within the depths of the Akasha. We can't work with it if we're passing out, okay? If we're falling asleep. We need to be able to work with it consciously, okay? So avoid the temptation to life hack sleep by falling into the Akasha, all right? Let's see. If you are exhausted as soon as you hit the Akasha, as soon as you start working on this, it's very likely that you might need sleep. So stop working on this and go sleep. And he suggests coming back to Akashic work when you have energy and alertness. Okay? Now, this energy and alertness, over time you can build that up. Like we could say, like a reservoir of wakefulness that can essentially exist to fuel your work with the Akasha. So this is where building up a lot of vital energy, harmonizing the elements can be really valuable to do for a long period of time before you start really working with the Akasha, because you need that reservoir of energy and the ability to, say, hold an asana, which will generate life force that will keep you from passing out. Okay? So that's just literally all the first page of this particular step. Right? Now you can work this a lot. The more you cultivate your relationship with the Akasha, the more potency you will have. Okay, this is usually a substance that arises on the other side of deep concentration work, right? And there are issues that can arise through working on it separately. One of those is that you can end up depleting your relationship with form. And form is useful. Let's see if this helps. Haha! All right. Form is useful. An organ that has form can function. Form and function work together. Cellular form, mitochondrial form and function. We want function. Okay, so after working with Akasha, instead of taking a nap immediately or going to sleep, I recommend doing physical stuff. So start with a little walk, make sure you come back to the body, right? And then once you've done that, build up some vital energy, powerful, traction type stretching. Go for, something ballistic, a sprint. Do 10, 20 really fast squats or whatever, like balls to the wall kind of squats. You just body weight. It doesn't have to be much. Throw like, 10, 20 seconds of chain punches. Something that, boom, wakes up your function, the function of the body, can be a really nice way to balance out deep Akashic work. All right. Now, remember, this is also the substance of equilibrium and harmony itself. Okay. Even Saturn literally has a hexagon on it, right? The 6 is to the sun, to harmony, literally. Saturn, the planet that organizes and orchestrates Akasha within this solar system. If this is out there for you, that's fine. Put it on the what if shelf, which is the if shelf. If it doesn't make sense now, maybe you'll get into it later. But try not to write things off as bullshit. Just put them on the what if shelf. There might come a time when that is what you need to work with. So, Akasha, governed by Saturn in this solar system, and Saturn literally has a storm that's been raging for as long as we know of in terms of time, that is a hexagon. So you can check that out. There's a lot of cool stuff on that. There is also plenty of interesting research out there about how Saturn could well have been the sun, the center of the solar system, before the current sun was the sun. What's his name? David Talbot, I think, had a book on that. Anyway, there's some interesting stuff out there. Again, the what if shelf that exists in the what if attic, in the what if house, on the what if block, in the what if neighborhood. It's all good. So, point being that Akasha can literally be the harmonizing equilibrium, like essence of that itself. Okay, which has to be looked at from grander perspectives, because often what we think of as harmony can be short-sighted and narrow-minded. So the more we evolve with this, and this starts happening, once you get into the Akasha, all bets are off. You're off to the races. The evolution of the perspective can grow rapidly once we get into it with the Akashic training. And from that point, things change. So, bear that in mind when in terms of imposing absolute meaning on something as vast as harmony and equilibrium. Okay, turning the page, finally. Okay, so the next portion of this exercise is to look at Akasha from the perspective, that's backwards. Look at the elements from the perspective of the Akasha. Okay? Okay, what is this? Well, the Akasha being the causal plane. When you start working in the Akasha, this is where very powerful effects start to take place. And this is where you really have to have your ethics together. Because it's very easy to use the Akasha if you've received transmission of Akasha from the dualistic ego and do a lot of damage. And this will come back at you eventually. So, we want to make sure that we are constantly working on purifying and equilibrating, equalizing, harmonizing ourselves at every layer that we are aware of. And as that grows, we want to keep up with the ethics on that plane of the vibrational scale. So, when you're looking at the elements from the Akasha, things change. Because you start to look at qualities that exist beyond form, prior to the element cascading into all of its formful tendrils, right? So, of course, you have your asana, your pore breathing, the Akasha, and I'm not a big fan of the way this is described here, And this, I think, leads to a lot of the weirdness that is often prevalent in Hermeticists, which is this word control, right? We are often looking at control, the word control, from the perspective of the evolution of whoever is reading the book, and where you're at. And if you have a certain level of development, it's unlikely you'll be going through books on, how to get there, unless you're wanting to teach. And you're looking for different ways of understanding and expressing that might relate to people. So, control. I think we discussed this in the mental training part, the training of the spirit, that control needs to evolve into freedom. So when you're working with the Akasha, you start to move into a relationship with prayer. You can't work through the Akasha, you can, but it's less effective, from the dualistic identity. So to give up that identity, you work through prayer. Not from the I want, please, 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 please thing, or type of expression, but from looking at prayer as absolute humility, in the sense that you void yourself of yourself, right, of your identity. You give yourself over completely, right? There's sacredness, reverence, humility. You can I can throw devotion in there, stillness, silence. These are all qualities that allow for deep, deep, deep relationships with prayer, and this helps us enter into a relationship with the Akasha. Now, true prayer tends to have an element of faith to it, right? Deep faith, surety, faith, and belief. So doubt cannot be a part of the picture, right? Cultivating faith substance is absolutely integral to working with the Akasha. Doubt will serve no place. Now, we often will cultivate doubt under the guise of humility, right? Everything has a near enemy. Near enemy of humility is doubt, right? To be humble has nothing to do with being not confident or being in doubt or in the absence of faith. So that's something to meditate on, really explore that. Doubt will set us back. It creates an incredible weakness because it disintegrates the bodies, right? It pulls apart and whatever the word is for unaligns the bodies. And the more alignment we have through which we can relate from the Akasha, the more potently everything can move through us and express. When things are pulled apart and there's no alignment, and doubt will do this, you get weak. And how can things manifest from the causal plane? Through a broken system with holes in it, right? It needs to move into form through a system with integrity. So very, very important that we cultivate our faith substance. This happens through observing at more and more refined layers of expression and vibration, the positive effects that you're offering up to the world as you evolve, how the world around you evolves through that evolution, right? That reciprocal process. Okay, so be aware of doubt. Now, here we get into this thing with control, right? And this instruction is that you go into the Akasha with the absolute, unshakable belief and faith that you have control, absolute control over the elements. Now, control is only required when your relationship sucks, right? If you have a poor relationship, you can look at this interpersonally as well. If you have a poor relationship, you impose control, right? That's, the iron fist, right? This is where you get a lot of really, really, really negative stuff going on. If a relationship's very good, then it doesn't take an iron fist to maneuver at all. The relationship's good. So, if you want somebody to walk over there, and, you're in a fight, you basically have to tie a rope around them and pull them over. That's control. That's a lot of force. That is because the relationship is in disarray. If the relationship's really good, you barely even have to think that you're, like cool, what's over there? And boom, you both go over there, or whoever's there. Okay, so the quality of the relationship matters, right? And the relationship here is to the elements through their Akashic essence. So in order to do this, you need to have a good relationship with your Akasha, right? With the relationship between your Akasha and universe, or maybe not pure universal Akasha, but with the all-encompassing nature of the Akasha, with the all-penetrating nature of the Akasha, how both of these relate to you and your Akashic self, the Akashic spirit. And then from there, you can start looking at the elements from a deep relationship with the Akasha that is healthy, positive, and full of harmony. Okay, this is going to facilitate rapid growth and good, I mean, it sounds so lame, but like good expression, right? Doing of good, having goodwill. This is what will be able to come from this. So very, very important. Relationship. You can develop power. You can develop power for control. Power is only a necessity if the relationship is poor. Meditate on this. You will find, I hope, a lot of value in meditating on this particular conundrum. You will note this in different schools that you go and train with, right? What is the relationship between the students and the teacher? Is the teacher in need of imposing control on the students? Are the students being encouraged towards freedom and liberation through the training? Or is the training inducing limitations? Okay, if the relationship is good, is pristine, is pure, all the students will be different. Will have different relationships to all the stuff they're learning, depending on where they are, what their interests are, what their particular, we could say like karmic path might be. And it's a beautiful thing to see and to be around. If the control thing is there, you get a bunch of students with the exact same sense of humor, with the exact same everything, and it's like hanging out with a bunch of robots that are carbon copies of the teacher. So be aware of this for your own training, and this is more about your relationship right now with yourself, and with yourself through these universal relationships, these Akashic relationships with the elements, right? Are you demanding control of yourself because you have a poor relationship with yourself? Or is your relationship with all aspects of yourself pure and very good? And if this is the case, it's a much more synchronous, light type of experience in terms of moving through life, and especially when it comes to practice and developing and evolving who and what you are. Okay, so really, 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 really important. Spend some time meditating on this if you like, and see what comes out of it sometimes different words can spark different realizations. For some people, the words I use are helpful, and for others, I've had students who be like, "Oh, could you use these words?" I'm like, "Yeah, if you mean what I mean when I'm saying this." And then they go, "Okay, yeah," and then you can just watch the release happen and the connection happen, because there's some words that make a little bit more sense. Now, of course, words are of form, and while they can help get you to a type of realization and release, ultimately the specifics of the words will be abandoned for the relationship with the substance itself. Okay, so that being said, there are more there's more encouragement here to work on yourself that he goes through to be a good person, essentially. But, you really need to work with this belief, with this faith, from the perspective of a relationship. Okay? Okay, we've got a little bit more here in this portion for the soul. Part of this attempt to control here is so that you are not controlled. Okay? Any part of ourselves that we have not cultivated a relationship with, and therefore freedom from, these are the parts that will control us without our knowledge. So, sovereignty and unity. These are the words that I find very helpful to use for this process. Right? If you have a poor relationship with something, you can impose control on it, absolutely, right? But there won't be sovereignty from that thing. You might be able to see it, you might have some awareness of it, but there won't be freedom there. This is often the case with addictions of many, most kinds, is that you can, and it might prevent you through identification with the addiction from engaging in the habit. Right? But there isn't a freedom there. Okay? And not to say that it's bad to not, kill yourself with particular drugs because, you're not free of the habit. Maybe it's better to stay alive and not do the drugs in a more rigid way. But we really do need to explore cultivating a relationship with ourselves, really unwinding and unwrapping that so that we can have freedom. Okay? Really important, because through that freedom, you will find far more refined relationships with higher fractals of unity. Okay? So, let's see. More stuff, conditions, obstacles. Okay, you're with the Akasha. Working with the Akasha, any work that you haven't done, of course, is going to create bigger obstacles because you're working causally. So, get your stuff together at each layer of the vibrational scale. Okay? Now, the last portion of this Step 6 schooling of the soul is in relation to rituals. Okay? And there's two steps to this. One is to bring the ritual into existence from a place of cause through either both the astral and the vital physical type of expressions. And then, of course, to dissolve the energy back so that it reticulates through the causal world. So this would be essentially 8 rituals bringing into form and out of form through the astral and through the physical. Of course, you could work this mentally as well, which would put you at 24. But point being that at this point in the training, your relationship to rituals has been cultivated. This is your own creativity. Now, he mentions many, many times throughout his books that a practitioner or a magician of a particular caliber will have no problems moving forward or finding many, many different creative ways of exploring different aspects of steps. And this is very, very true. So don't get too hung up on things. As you progress, things will open up for you. Okay, so you create your rituals, and especially because you're working with the Akasha, we want to be cognizant of who might be able to copy these rituals. Okay, so keeping them to yourself can be a way to protect yourself from other people using your rituals, and essentially through the Akasha, again, spaceless, tapping into you and your energetic relationships directly. So something to be aware of. Some people really enjoy the use of ritual, and some people are very averse to it. The ritual has a lot of value because you're essentially building your relationship with that particular substance and function, right? Form and function through a substance. Now, as you build this, the ritual becomes more and more and more powerful to the point where it doesn't require, he mentions that the imagination is no longer required. Now, a lot of people are averse to the word imagination because it is imagining things and functioning in the mind and of form, and this is a very Buddhist type of, that sort of secularist Buddhist type of approach, or the hard-nosed Buddhist type of approach. That's where I encounter it a lot in those worlds. But basically, even if that's your paradigm, you still sit down to meditate, which means there's something that you are changing or that you're tuning into to work with. Okay, so here he's mentioning that through the power of the ritual, you don't necessarily need to use any technique of the mind to touch into a relationship with a substance or a function through a particular causal form given to expressions of energy. Oops, that's just my alarm going off. I might need to move soon. They have these rules in this town that you can't be in a vehicle that's of a certain height on a street for more than 3 hours. You can drive around the block and then hang there for 3 hours, but you can't be in the same spot. So I think we'll be okay this time of year. Anyway, ritual. Now, this means that you can do the ritual, have access to the energy while you are focused on other things. Now, people who like to practice all day often don't, if you like to be in a state of deep relationship with the energy all the time, then often the ritual becomes less of a priority because you're always sort of in that state. The problem with this is that if you're not very, very refined in your thoughts, in your feelings, in your actions, I don't really want to use the word disciplined because that can be a little bit impinging, but definitely refined and aware, then you can be accidentally placing causes, into existence that aren't positive. So this again is indicating the importance of cultivating the quality of this thing that we are doing all this work with, right? So really we really develop ourselves. And I took my bookmark out and put it on the table, so we're done with the book for now. We really develop ourselves, right? Working through the Akasha allows for deep refinement in this. All penetrating, all encompassing, free of time, free of space. The tensions of time, the tensions of space, the perceptions of time, the perceptions of space. Now that means that you then have the opportunity to look at space and time as conditioning factors. Okay, and that's a whole other world of exploration. So anyway, meditate on that one. And let's move on to the schooling of the physical body, the physical training for step 6. Let's continue on here with step 6, Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics, looking at the physical training. So up to this point in step 6, we've looked at the Akasha. We've looked at some other interesting explorations in the mental training. And when we get to the physical training, he more or less suggests that all of the physical training in terms of the actual development of the physical body that knowledge has been integrated by the student, by the aspirant, and you can, at this point in the training, be very stable in further exploration of that. So, just in brief, before we get into the instructions for this step, anything that you're developing in terms of any frequency that you're working on, any state of alchemy that you're refining, any state of refinement, when it comes to the physical training, we want to be able to take that state of refinement and then bring it in through, of course, the mental body, but also allow that to alter and reticulate through the astral and physical bodies. Once you have that really working through the physical body in a seated position, then you would take that into standing practice. Then you would take that into a slow Tai Chi-esque type of movement practice. And from there, then you would go back to, say, a standing practice, and you might add a very small amount of weight to it and make sure that you can still release underneath that load into the more refined frequency. So this process of integrating each new alchemical evolution that you go through in through the body can take some time. And so how you choose to explore that through the physical body and through other modes of expression. Of course, there's the strengthening of the body, the physical training, then there's modes of expression of each layer of refinement that you do go through. So, something to keep in mind in terms of your further progression with physical training. Your own development will give you the creativity and the ideas to keep exploring this more and more and more. Now, into this particular section of the book, we look at 4 things. Each of these things are fabrications of the human themselves. Of the 4, 1 is positive, 3 are ways in which we shoot ourselves in the foot. Okay, the 4th that's positive could be a way that you shoot yourself in the foot, but you want to make sure you've actually developed to a point where it's a positive expression. Okay, so these 4 things are 1, building elementals. That would be the positive one. 2 is the creation of larva, what Franz Bardon describes as larva. 3 is what he calls schemata or schema. And the 4th is what he refers to as phantoms. So let's look at elementals first, because those are interesting in the sense that we can do some positive things for ourselves and others with them. Now, he gives 4 parameters for them, and you can read through these. They're relatively simple, the parameters that he gives to the creation of the elementals, and yeah, you can read through those. They're relatively simple. Now, when he looks at the energy that you're going to bring in for the elemental, This is done through light. Now, the thing here is he doesn't specify how to get to the substance that you want to work with. So this is something to consider because, as mentioned in previous steps, light exists in each of the layers of the vibrational scale. You have the light of life force. There's many different types of astral light. So the way he describes accessing the light in this particular section of the book makes it seem like it is vital light. So that might be a good place to start, as he just goes straight to light. So building a bunch of light, condensing that light, and then giving it the 4 parameters in terms of shape, duration, in terms of lifespan, a name, and a purpose. The expression of this intention and purpose the same way you would work on your own subconscious. So anyways, you embed that into the sphere of light, and then you would have that kind of hang around to fulfill its purpose, whether it's for you or for a student or somebody else. So all of the specifics at this point in somebody's training, the ingenuity of the student is present. And if you aren't at that stage, it can be a very kind of a pain in the ass to hear, because you go, just tell me what to do. But the freedom of the aspirant is of paramount importance. And if the training has been holistic and full, and the liberation of the student, of the practicer, is at the forefront of the training, then the potentials are there, the ingenuity is there, the creativity is there, and the understanding, the foundation to explore creatively is also present, right? So that's something to keep in mind here. Now, when we are looking at, say, the creation of elementals, if you look at other systems of training, the process, the ritual of creating an elemental can be vast periods of time, in terms of maybe it's like a multi-day ritual where you are in deep meditation and deep relationship with all the aspects and purposes and all of the lifespans, all of the qualities that will be embedded into this elemental. And you are building the energy, the life of this elemental for days, right? Hour after hour after hour, not 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, take a break, do another few hours, take a break to the next day, but literally nonstop. And so you're really building a critical mass of life and intelligence into the elemental. So that's something that exists in different systems, and we want to consider that, because one thing that Franz Bardon doesn't account for is the time involved in the really fulfilling and creating these states, to really release into these states and these energies. Now, of course, the more developed the practitioner is, the less time is required to reach the same state. So some of these rituals, in whatever system they might come from, might be required to take somebody who's working from a lower skill, and that it might be a requirement to get them to a refined enough point where they can really manifest that elemental. Now, that might be something that you don't want to do. It might be something that you do want to do. So explore it and have fun with it. I have found that long duration training over days can yield very, very powerful results. Development that you might have thought previously would take years or decades even can be achieved in much shorter periods of time, in days, weeks, even days, because of the exponentially cumulative effect of hour after hour after hour training. So if you are going to do a long duration training, or ritual, then it's good to have some background in that, so that you're not at war with yourself. Because very often people approach that from a combative or competitive relationship in terms of the relationship with themselves, right? It's something that you look at as a monumental task and something that you're going to achieve, right? Essentially, you're going to win against yourself by completing the full 30-hour meditation, or 24 hours, or 12, or 3 days, or whatever it's going to be. If you look at it as a Herculean task, it will be a Herculean task. If you look at it as something not that you have to fight against yourself to achieve, but as an opportunity or a gift that you are allowing yourself to engage in, it can actually be a very positive, easy, in a sense, easy type of experience. Now, of course, you'll go through intensely, almost like trauma as you're being ripped apart and put back together, and ripped apart and put back together again and again and again. But even if it's to create an elemental, you have to sustain a concentration, and to do that, parts of you that don't want to focus on that thing have to die off. So there's a lot of value in long duration practice if you can approach it from a healthy mindset. When I have led long duration practices for people in the past, one of the sort of errors in perspective is that it is a competition with yourself to get through it, right? And so leading up to something like that with just longer sits, just get used to being still for longer periods of time. And maybe if you have a purpose for an elemental and you want to spend 3 days in a ritual charging up that elemental and really building all of its capacities, maybe doing a retreat prior to that of 10 days, 2 weeks, 7 days, something where you're in practice all day in a easier way, where you're sleeping through the night, and leading up to it, you practice for a couple hours, you take a little coffee break or whatever, you practice for a few hours, eat some food, take a nap, practice for a few hours, you build up. Of course, no media distractions during this time. This is all you're focused on. And then you build up the energy over that time, and over the days, the duration of your individual sits will get longer, longer, longer. And then say you're 7 days in, 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in. At the end of that, you do the culmination of that particular retreat, which would be your multi-day ritual where you are building this elemental. So here's the thing, is if you're going to put that much preparation into an elemental, the purpose of that elemental will be something pretty important, right? It's unlikely you're going to put that much time in to prepare if it's not a good purpose. So it's kind of a bit of a safety factor, which can be good. Now, as you develop more and more and more, what somebody else who's a beginner, a beginner who might need 3 weeks to really refine and build up the relationship to, higher alchemical states, you might live in that state if you've been training a long time, in which case you might be able to do what, they might need 3 days at the end to do to really build that elemental. You might be able to do in a few hours or minutes, right? This stuff all scales. It's all shifting and changing, and as you evolve, everything changes, right? So anyway, building an elemental can be done in many different ways. He offers one possibility here in terms of how to do that. Now, the elemental, the way he creates it here, it acts out its purpose on the mental plane. So that means it will influence through the mental mind substance, essentially. It'll influence through the mental plane, and through alterations in the mental plane, the associated changes astrally and physically can start to occur, whether it's in yourself or in a student or somebody you might be doing healing work with, etc. So the mental substance is what gets affected by the elemental, and the changes astrally and physically are due to the cascade down the chain essentially of the mental changes. Okay, so anyway, that's the elementals portion of this. Then he moves into larva, schema, and phantoms, and these are, you can look at them as different explorations of essentially human error, right? Repercussions of the response system, right? Good and bad being attributed to stimulus. So we'll look at this a little more, because I think this is the most valuable way to look at these three things, the larva, the schemata, and the phantoms, as things that we heal within ourselves as we surrender to more refined substrate of reality. You will have to go through these things, okay? So what's a larva? A larva is essentially a psycho-emotional scarring that occurs in response to environmental stimulus. So something happens that is a little bit traumatic, and that creates a jolt through the nervous and neuronal systems, and there's some type of attachment to that. And because of that attachment, we feed that particular larva, right? And it grows. And the more a larva grows, the more it wants to be alive. So this is very similar to how you might look from a Buddhistic meditative standpoint, as you feed with your attention. Whatever your mind attends to, you feed that. So every time you're in that environment and having the same response, you feed this particular symbolical larva. And over time, it grows, it builds, and it almost takes on a life of its own. So as you work through the meditative process, you will find that you start to unwind these particular psycho-emotional scarrings. And that has tremendous value. If you look at these are internally created, and they might feel like they're external beings and creatures, but these are internal creations, and they happen so fast, right? That mental relationship to stimulus and giving it meaning is so fast that we really need to work our way to and through the entire process that occurs that allows us to give meaning to the environment, to stimulus, to mental relationships, right? With anything around us. That this tree or this plant means this plant. There's light bouncing off it. This is being given meaning through the stimulus, the relationships that the eye goes through. There's a lot going on here. So the more we can unwind all of this, the more clearly and cleanly and harmoniously we can continue our work, our progression of development. Okay? If you are developing, relationships to higher degrees of energy, frequency, etc., etc. And you aren't taking care of this quality, these scarrings that Bardon refers to as the larva, then that energy is going to feed those scarrings. And your expression of those scarrings will continue to harm you and to harm everything that's in your environment. So it is of the utmost importance that we sort ourselves out. And this is, and the following two that we'll get to, the schema and the phantoms, these are reasons to spend some time in very simple types of meditation, right? To really integrate, like we talked about, in terms of the physical training, to really bring the higher, the more refined frequencies through the mental, astral, physical bodies, so that you can really integrate and evolve and clean out these old habits and these old perspectives in terms of stimulus and response, right? The meaning that we give to what we perceive. We want to clean this out, right? There's a lot of sayings that kind of hint at this. I'm always saying, what you touch with the mind grows. What you place your attention on grows, right? And so if you are attending to your old perspectives and habits with your attention, well, those will grow. That's where the energy will go. It will grow. And then there is these sayings, how you look at the world, change how you look at the world, and the world that you look at changes. Many permutations of these particular types of expressions. And so we need to look at our perspectives and that moment of response, right? That moment where meaning is given and the entire cascade of events that occurs that creates that in us. So anyway, that's more or less the larva. You can explore this more and more and more. The schema are again fabrications that we errant meaning that we give to stimulus. So this is looking at meaning. The examples he gives are like someone that you see that you might have the appearance of evil to your, subconscious habits of what a particular face shape might be. Maybe you saw a movie as a kid or read there was an illustration of somebody evil that had particular traits, like physical traits. You see someone that matches those traits, you recognize that subconsciously, and then you impose evil onto that person. The other example he gives is, and then you obsess over it and start creating all kinds of stories. The other example he gives is essentially pornographic, where maybe it's somebody maybe it's through imagery or whatever, but you obsess over the meaning of a particular interaction. You give meaning, you give life force, you give your energy and attention to a particular relationship with stimulus, and that can grow. Now, it seems the more pornographic example that he gives here is sort of like beyond lust, and where you get very emotionally attached and develop an obsessive, very negative obsessive love for that particular relationship that you've created in your mind. So again, bring the frequencies you're working with through the mental, astral, physical bodies and really surrender the obstacles to these, and it will start to clean out, if you're working with light especially, it will start to clean out these schema. So just another perspective or another lens to look at the aspects of ourselves that are in contrast to reality, what we are fabricating or creating. And And the last is the phantoms, and this is a fabrication of essentially imposing memory onto the dead, right? So this might be from the perspective of, this dead person being a saint. It might be them being a devil. It's imposed meaning through remembrance. And very often the dead are pedestalized, right? The negatives of how they acted out in their life, these aren't really looked at. And so it might be a very positive phantom. Now, many people who do mediumship type of work are reading the memories of the person, right, that is being sought after. They're reading memories from the live person in front of them of the dead person, and then essentially expressing the memories of the person in front of them, of the dead person. And it's sort of a cycle here, and it might not have really any connection to the actual dead individual. It is a phantom, and phantoms can be built up by many people, right? And they can also be a little bit different because everyone's got a different relationship to their memory of the dead. So once again, these are fabrications. And in order to work through these, you need to find the part of yourself that is creating those and that is holding on to that. And one of the most difficult things to do with the dead is to let go of them, right? To let go of the memories, to let go of the meaning, and to let go of the narrow lens through which we might view them or have viewed them, right? So phantoms, schema, and larva, these are all sort of different aspects of psychological and emotional, we might look at it as error, but certainly attachment, right? Psychological and emotional attachment, and psychological and emotional fabrication, and the imposition of a meaning onto stimulus and onto the environment. So this is really important from the perspective of cleaning and harmonizing who and what you are, and then what you essentially where you vibrate at. Now, when it comes to the elementals, of course, those are fabrications in a sense as well, but these are choiceful fabrications, whereas the larva, the schemata, and the phantoms are habitual fabrications or trauma-based response fabrications. They aren't things that we're choosing to create. And so through looking at choiceful creation, through building an elemental, in contrast to habitual or traumatically induced fabrication, this can give us some really nice sort of like essentially like a vibrational scale of sorts. It can give us a really nice understanding of how creation occurs, how the fabrication occurs, because through the elemental work, you're being very choiceful and very specific in how it's created. And just like with the visualization exercises, through building your relationship and understanding with the creative process, this can help us on the other side with the destructive process. And this is the healthiest way I've found to look at this particular section of the book, is the development through dissolution of the individual who's doing the exercises, right? One of the biggest things that will hold us back here is sort of pedestalizing the larva or finding any type of victimhood. This will hold us back. And this is referred to here as if you see yourself as a victim, this is in relation to the schema section. If you see yourself as a victim, you will find all types of reason for the perpetuation of your victimhood, and you will create more and more reason. So lots to be explored here, and this particular view of looking at the phantoms, the larva, and the schema as sort of facets of the creative identity, facets of the fabricating parts of the identity. This can really open up doors for people who might be struggling on those fronts. And the creation of the elementals, I know I'm repeating myself here, but that's what I'm doing, so I'm going to keep doing it. The creation of the elementals, once again, can really help us to understand the subconscious fabrications. Consciously fabricate with incredible preparation and intention and detail, and this can help us understand how we subconsciously fabricate. So these are just explorations, and if you go through deep meditative processes, like we talked about with the preparation for the elementals, if you want to really do it deep, that can have a lot of positive value when it comes to your own relinquishment of your own issues and habits. So anyway, this is more or less the end of step 6. If you're interested in training with me, I have courses on the website in Tai Chi and Qi Gong, meditation, Hermetic magic. Now, these two combine essentially at a point, and you can use the Tai Chi to work on the physical embodiment, psychological, the astral, and the physical embodiment of what you're working on in the Hermetic Magic, Qi Gong, and meditation program. Okay, if you're interested in private training, please shoot me a note, and we can organize a private session. Those are 2 hours in length, and we do a lot in those. If you're interested in training in person, I have a retreat coming up at the end of June. This is a 16-day retreat, level 1 and 2. And we look at energy strength training. We look at the cultivation of your relationship with the elements and the astral energies and planes. We look at some psychic self-defense. This is all on the level 1. We work through a relationship with equanimity, with Akasha, with light in different capacities. And then in the level 2, we begin exploring, of course, taking those skills from level 1 and exploring them and expanding on them. And we look at a bunch of other really cool stuff with some invocation and some further expansive explorations of the nature magic and how that relates through like an introduction into the cosmology from a planetary sense, and start working through different relationships with light and more cosmic forces in the solar system, and we bring that back through. Lots of fun stuff. So anyway, if you're interested, you can check out the links in the description, and I hope you enjoyed this. Please share if you enjoyed it. If you think you have some friends who might enjoy it too, please share the videos with them. And yeah, that's about it. All right, thanks for your time. Bye.